Hi everyone, thanks for the introduction. As I mentioned, I'm Emily Mills. I'm Head of Digital and Product Design at Soul. We're a Canberra-based service transformation consultancy. This is my third time speaking at DrupalSouth, and it's always so lovely to be here and be part of this community and share my knowledge and learn from you as well. A little bit about Soul. We do end-to-end delivery from strategy, research, through to design and development and technical delivery. Some of our most recent Drupal projects, we did discovery and design for the National AI Centre on the recently launched ai.gov.au, which we worked on in partnership with the awesome crew at Annex. And we've also been working on web design and development for the 2026 National State of the Environment report, which is a really big and dense report, but we're going to make it look really pretty and cool. So stay tuned for that one later in the year. So a huge part of our work at Soul, and I'm sure all part of your work as well, is workshops. And honestly, a lot of what I'm sharing today comes from things that maybe went wrong before they went right. So this is a bit of an accumulation of things that I've perhaps learned the hard way. So today is about workshops, not really what you see on LinkedIn, but the real version. So, you know, the workshops where people vent, where conversations go totally off track, and somehow you leave with 400 sticky notes and no actual decisions. So this is really about running discovery workshops that can actually influence delivery. So I think a lot of us have been in workshops where everyone really feels productive in the moment, but afterwards maybe nothing really changes. So you might be in a workshop where there's no clear purpose, so people show up not really understanding what the workshop is trying to achieve. Nobody may own decisions, so everyone's contributing, but nobody has the authority or the decision-making power to actually move things forward. Conversations may stay abstract, so you might spend an hour talking about making things more intuitive without defining what that actually means. And yes, these stickies are real examples from real workshops of what the website should be, which is pretty vague, and how do you move forward with that? And of course is the we must have AI. And you say, why? Like, for what? We just have to have it. And you're like, okay, cool. So a part of that too is kind of sometimes you might have the wrong people in the room. You might only have very senior stakeholders, or you might have no decision makers at all. And you might be in a workshop where the outputs don't actually influence delivery. So this is the big one where the workshop might not actually influence something that's in the backlog, any workflows or priorities. So what was the point? So I think you can kind of sum it up to be that a workshop without direction and structure could really just be like a meeting just with like some fun, colourful stickies. Something I believe about workshops is that the good ones are usually won before they even start. So being prepared and getting really organised beforehand. So one of the first ones is about defining the goals. You really need to be clear about what it is that you're trying to learn or what you're trying to uncover, what decisions need to be made, and what the workshop will actually influence afterwards. So when I talk about defining the goals, I don't mean vague things like discuss the website. This is how websites drift when it's too broad. So when you're thinking about goals, you could have things like, let's understand content publishing pain points, or let's validate the expectations of a particular feature. So these are actionable goals and they can help create direction and keep people grounded throughout the session. A workshop goal should be specific enough that you can tell afterwards whether you achieved it. So do we now understand the content publishing pain points, or did we actually understand what to expect from this particular feature? So if you kind of have vague goals, then the workshop might be vague, and then what comes out afterwards is vague, and you're kind of like, oh, maybe we need to do another workshop when that works. Right, the next one is about getting the right people in the room. And this one may sound obvious, but it's actually one of the biggest reasons why workshops may not come to fruition as they should. So the people closest to the work usually know where the real friction is. So this is your support teams, admins, publishers, tech teams. I've been in workshops where leadership might have thought something was working beautifully and no issues, and then the operational teams were quietly drowning and like, save us please, this is so awful. So you do need both though, the people doing the work and those who are empowered to decide and help drive things forward. But I would say you might want to avoid people who are what I would call basically workshop NPCs. So observers who are physically present, but they're spiritually elsewhere. Okay, so jumping into the workshop itself, balancing structure and vibes, and it's a bit of an art. So I think one of the things that people, they won't share honestly if the room doesn't feel safe and if they don't feel empowered to contribute meaningfully. So if people, feel judged or blamed or dismissed, you might only get surface level feedback, or people might not give any feedback at all. So I think it's really important at the start of the session to acknowledge that there will be different perspectives in the room, and explain that there's no wrong answers. Everyone here is to contribute and share their thoughts and feelings, and also clarify that if there are issues that crop up, the session isn't about blame. Everyone's on the same team and working together. And something that is really helpful in reinforcing this and getting people on side is I'll actually brief maybe like some senior stakeholders or people who'll be in the session beforehand and ask them to reinforce that the workshop is a safe place. So, you don't want to be in the meeting with your boss and like want to hold your tongue. You want to feel comfortable that you can, share openly and not sort of, be reprimanded for it. And another tip as well, I think, in terms of encouraging participation and creating a safe space is that participation doesn't always mean speaking. There's a bunch of ways that you can get people's insights in a session, whether that be virtually or in a room, in real life, old school. So you can do things like polls and surveys. Microsoft Teams has a bunch of polling and surveying tools built into it. And you can do like word clouds and cool stuff like that. And then you've got third-party things like Mentimeter and Slido and those types of things. You've also got Teams chat, so inviting people to type their answers as well instead of singing out. Stickies, of course, and silent brainstorming where you might just put some music on and people can just write down ideas and you kind of share them and go through them at a group afterwards. So people who might not necessarily be the loudest, they're still sharing their ideas in a meaningful way and you can kind of explore them. And, some of the really good insights come from, these sticky notes and polls, and usually the loudest person in the workshop usually perhaps isn't the most useful source of insight, and it's usually those silent ones who, have where the real gold is. This next one, sometimes people just need to vent, and honestly, that is okay. People, particularly with legacy systems or fragmented organisations, they're often carrying years of frustration into a workshop, and while having those types of discussions might seem unproductive or messy at first, it actually gives insight to where the real pain is, and sometimes frustration is the discovery. And I think part of unlocking, people to come openly and share ideas, they can't focus on the future if they still need to unpack the past and kind of have that closure. So I think allowing people to have that space to share openly and vent a little bit is actually really helpful. Another one to keep in mind is that most people actually struggle with blank page thinking, and I'm sure we've all been there. You open up a Word document to start writing something and it's just a white page and you go, what am I going to write? So I think if you ask though something like, what should the experience look like, you'll often get vague answers, if any at all. But if you come prepared with examples, if you show a rough wireframe or a sample workflow or an example from a competitor, or even a bad example, suddenly everyone has opinions. So people are usually much better at reacting at something than inventing. So you may need to do a bit of hand-holding along that process to kind of help get the thoughts flowing and give people something to talk about. And this ties into my point about, workshop preparation can have a really big impact on your session success. So yes, these things do take a little bit of time to kind of develop and pop in, but believe me, you'll have much more fruitful discussion in your session if you've got some things to kind of use as a jumping off point. So I'm going to run you through some of my favourite workshop activities. The first one being roses, thorns and buds. Hands up, has anyone ever done this one before in a workshop? A few? Okay, nice. This is one of my favorites because it's really simple and people understand it immediately. So you've got roses, which you have your participants identify what's working. So they write down all the things that are really good and what's working that they want to keep and they think is really lovely. And then you move on to the thorns, which is your frustration. So things that are annoying, things that don't really work very well, things that are painful and honestly might just kind of suck. And then you've got your buds. So what are the opportunities that might come? That might be ideas that people have been sitting on for a while. People might just be kind of getting ideas already by looking at the thorns. So you can kind of start gathering some, okay, well, what could this look like? Or what could the next step be? Particularly on the thorns, it's good to unpack those too. So as I kind of spoke about, thorns can be a bit of a spot to have that vent. But you can have some really meaningful follow-up prompts. So, why is this painful? What is actually causing this? And what needs to change? The next one on the right there is a vibe check or a temperature check. This is really good for exposing disconnects. For example, if you asked a team, how confident are we in the publishing workflow? You'll often see leadership at a 5. Yes, we're so confident, this is great. And then your operational teams are at a 2. I had a workshop earlier in the year with a client where, teams assumed that the workflows were consistent. So as you can see here, some people are like, it's great. And others were saying, no, it's not so much. And some people thought that the processes worked really fine. And others were creating workarounds constantly that their other team members didn't know they were doing. And people were really surprised, like, oh, I didn't realize that this was so hard for your team. So it's a good opportunity as well to see where the pain points are within the different teams, but also to help teams understand that not everyone is having the same experience across things. Some other goodies, we've got a magic wand. So this one's good for cutting through overthinking really quickly. I typically will put this one at the end of a workshop because it often helps people self-summarise the workshop themes or the biggest areas of focus. So essentially saying if you had a magic wand and you waved it, what would you change tomorrow? But in saying that, you could also put it at the very start of a workshop, and then that way you can get ideas, okay, well, what are the biggest pain points and what can we talk through in the session and kind of unpack it a bit. So I think it's really good to kind of have that as a jumping off point as well as a summarization. The next one, worst thing you could build is good, as people are often more honest about failure than success. They know what they don't want, and it's also really good to know what to avoid. So if someone says, I really don't want this, I hate this example, you go, okay, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do everything but that. And finally, MVPs are nice to have. So this is really helpful as a prioritization where that strategy starts to become real. So if you've kind of got your ideas, so let's say, for example, we did roses, buds, thorns, and then we've got all our opportunities, we can go, okay, let's have some buckets. One is must have, should have, could have, future, and then people can kind of pop them in whatever bucket that they think it is, and then that way you can go, great, must haves, that's the things that we need to start looking at first. Should haves, maybe like that, and that's kind of like a prioritizing thing, and that's really good because everyone has a say in it, and then you can maybe do stuff like dot voting, like yes I agree or no I don't. So people are constantly making decisions and having a say throughout the whole workshop, and then people can feel really confident that they've contributed meaningfully. Keeping workshops on track. So good facilitation, I think, is really about balancing, having the structure and direction, but also having openness as well to kind of let things go with the flow a little bit. I think, you want people to feel heard, but you also don't want the workshop to kind of drift into chaos. So if things are kind of starting to get off track, and, I'm sure we've all been in a thing where one person just is going on this massive tangent, you could say things like, oh, that's a really good point, let's capture it. Or I think we're drifting slightly beyond today's goal. And remember, we talked about the goals at the start of the session, so you can say, hey, remember we're talking about this today. Or, maybe that's probably a phase 2 conversation because, today we're talking about this, or the scope of the project is this. And I think parking lots as well are one of a really good facilitation tool, because It acknowledges to the person, yes, I hear you, I'm capturing it and I'm going to put it over here, and it's not getting lost anywhere. I'm taking note of it and we'll return to it. But I think they only work if people trust that the car will come back from the parking lot. If the parking lot just becomes a graveyard for ideas, people, they're not going to trust the process and they probably won't want to engage again. So I think it's really important that if you do capture ideas, to return to them, or at least acknowledge that, that you'll come back to them at another time. Workshops are also really about reading people. So keeping an eye out for energy shifts, particular frustration, dominance. So if one or two people are kind of dominating the conversation, or making other people feel like they can't comfortably speak up. Disengagement as well as circular discussion. And on that sort of circular discussion, I think every workshop at some point, or multiple points across the workshop, you need to move from the discussion into decision making. So sort of playing things back, or specifically calling out, okay, like I can hear we have a lot to say on this, but what's the next step? Or what should we do next? Or, it sounds like blah. And this can really help ground people and bring them back to, okay, what's next? After the workshop's finished, now what? The workshop doesn't end when you hang up on Teams. I think one of the key things I would say is, once you've gathered all the gold and all the insights, don't wait 2 weeks to process the outputs. Context fades, nuance fades, emotion fades, your memory fades. So it's good to kind of do that either right away or the next day. So doing your synthesis while everything is fresh will help big time. And one of the other really great things is kind of having like a debrief with your team or someone else that was in the session with you, and kind of go, oh, what was your big takeaway from that? Or I really, was hearing that this was a key theme. And they might go, oh, really? Well, what about when so-and-so said this? And you go, oh, yeah. So it's really great to kind of bounce ideas off each other and kind of help sort of just, what are your key takeaways off the top of your head? Can really help in sort of inform in your synthesis. Another really valuable thing I would say doing after the workshop, again within like a day or two, is playing your understanding back to the group. So everyone who was in the workshop, either sending like a summary, or like, hey, here were the key things we spoke about, or here were the key decisions, because typically alignment usually feels stronger in the workshop or the room than what it might actually be. So say you sent a summary out to everyone, you might get people coming back going, hang on, that's actually not what I meant, or now that I've had some time to think about it and process it, I actually don't think it will work, so maybe can we do something else instead? Which I think is much better to find out now or earlier on in the piece than in a few weeks when you're already too far along to change things without having a big impact. So kind of nipping things in the bud if there are any misalignment. And of course, people will engage more deeply when they can see that their input actually changed something. So looping back to everyone on how the workshop influenced the project will really get people on your side and make them feel really confident in the final output, going, oh yeah, we did have a workshop, and I can see that they listened to my idea, or they put this in, or the idea didn't quite work, but they looped back with me and kind of kept me up to date as to perhaps why that wasn't it. So I think just kind of having updates and kind of keeping people informed is really helpful. And when we're talking about interpretation, sort of turning those insights into action, in a workshop, people might usually describe sort of symptoms or ideas or frustrations or opportunities first. And your job is to actually identify the underlying patterns in here. So you're listening for things like repeated frustrations, emotional reactions, ideas that people get really excited about, and processes that are also really working well that you might want to preserve. So when we're looking at this process here, we start with an observation or an input. So it might be a pain point, it might be someone's idea, it could be a successful process, it could be a behaviour that people keep repeating, and it could also be an opportunity that somebody identifies. And then from that, we look at the pattern underneath it. So, what opportunity might this create What could we improve, simplify, prioritise or build on from this? And then finally, how does that translate into delivery actions? So in practice, what might this look like? Imagine you're running a workshop for a large content-heavy Drupal site. Stakeholders might say things like, publishing takes forever, or every team does it differently. But they might also say users really like this section of the website, or we wished more of the site worked like this. Now, it's not very likely that someone in the workshop is going to say, we need reusable structured content and a simplified workflow. What they're usually describing is their experience, and your job is to identify the patterns that underlie it. So underneath all of those conversations, the insights might be an inconsistent workflow, or successful patterns that are worth replicating, or useful processes that we should scale. And then that can then create opportunities to reduce friction or build on what's already working well. And then that becomes the delivery direction. So it might be reusable components. It might be content governance guidance. It might be roadmap decisions. It might be training for certain members of staff. So what I'm trying to say is that the workshop itself doesn't necessarily produce the solution all the time. It produces the understanding that may guide you to that solution. So I guess as a bit of a high-level recap, what makes workshops actually work? So having those clear goals, what are we here to do today? What are we trying to achieve? Having the right people in the room, so people who can share their everyday experiences with you, as well as those who have authority or decision-making power to help drive those decisions forward. Create a safe environment where people want to share, where people feel like their input will be heard and will be actioned on. Having some of those structured activities, so not just rocking up with a blank whiteboard and going, cool, so what are we going to have here? Having that participation beyond speaking as well. So as I mentioned, the polls, surveys, dot voting, even just shows of hands. Who likes this? Having that clear facilitation as well, so guiding the discussion while also allowing people to have that space to speak freely and kind of feel heard. Having that visible decision making as well, so sharing things back during the workshop and afterwards. And then having those outputs really clearly tied to delivery, which I think sort of loops back to those goals at the start there as well. So I think at the end of the day, good workshops, they're not necessarily about having the perfect Miro board. They're more so about helping teams really surface real issues, make better decisions, reduce ambiguity, and create momentum that can really set up for success as you move into delivery. So thank you, everyone. I'm happy to take questions. And also here, maybe, I don't know, does anyone have any workshop horror stories or other cool activities that they like to run? But yeah, thank you all.
Got a question for Emily or a horror story to share?
A horror story.
Really hope this is a horror story.
Name names.
We had a horror story with a university client, not the person sitting next to me, so it's all good. And it was a big, actually air our grievances at each other, and we were just sitting in the room and they ripped each other to shreds. So that meant the project went really well. But my question to you, and I know the kind of answer is it depends, but do you have like an optimum workshop size in terms of participants? I often find that when I'm trying to organise them and get buy-in, I have 2 or 3 people. Then I have 6, and then it's 8 people. Yeah. And it becomes completely unproductive. And so where do you draw the line? How do you sort of structure that? And where do you decide this needs to be 2 different?
Totally. And I think you're right. When there's too many people in the room, it can either get totally unwieldy, or you do have the 3 or 4 people who are talking and everyone else, as I say, is like an NPC not really contributing. So I would say, I don't know, maybe like 8 to 10, like no more than 10, definitely, I would say, in a session. And I think, you might have a client or stakeholder go, oh, but this team and that team, like, hey, cool, maybe can we have like a rep from each of those teams? Or another thing that we've done in the past is, we might have a set of questions or like things that we want to kind of unpack for all the different teams. So say, for example, like you got a comms team and a design team and a corporate something team. You could say, all right, these are the things that we kind of need to know from your side of things. Go and have a chat with your own team, like outside of the workshop. Here's some of the things. And then you, Griffin, as the rep for that team, come in and we can like have a thing in the workshop. So it's not that everyone misses out. It's like they can share their insight, like maybe beforehand, or some things that they really want to talk about. Because people will be like, I have things I want to say, and they can articulate it right then and there. So I think that's one way to do it. But I think another way would be having like breaking it up then. So you might have a session like just with one team and then just with another team. But I think, yeah, any more than 10, I think can be really tricky to kind of, keep it targeted.
Have we got another question? There we go.
Yeah, that was a great talk, thank you. I took lots of notes
Sweet.
for how to hold my own workshop. And I just wondered, you mentioned online, holding online workshops. And I find it quite challenging, especially with new clients, just to read the room.
Yep.
And, I had to hurry some clients along the other day, and not knowing quite how that lands. And it's just a lot harder. Do you have any tips on that?
Yeah, for sure. And I think that is one of the tricky things. Anything online, you're missing those kind of, body language or kind of nuances that you would not see in an in-person session. So that is quite tricky. I think some of the things that I have found helpful, perhaps along the way, is maybe the main client contacts say, like, you could maybe have a chat with them before the workshop. Is there anything you're feeling nervous about, or is there anything that you're really kind of wanting me to unpack or something like that? And then having a check-in with them again afterwards, after the session, I think is really helpful. But I think in terms of like, how do you read the room when the room is, might have people with their cameras off? So I think that's where one of the sort of handy tools like those polls and stuff I was talking about can be really helpful. So oftentimes I might have like a discussion point, and you can kind of like draft polls and then you just go like release kind of when you're ready. So sometimes I might have like 20 polls sitting there. I might not use all of them, but it's just like, maybe if one person's kind of talking, I'll just release a poll. So it's like, well, so-and-so's, everyone else can kind of go, oh, yep. Or, rate 1 to 5 this, or how do you feel about blah? So I think having those alternative methods of kind of getting people's feedback can help. But I think there is no substitution for actually being able to see someone's face and engage with them. But it's kind of like you do what you can.
I think we can do one more.
Thank you, Emily. That was a great talk and lots of really good key takeaways. I just have a question in terms of the actual workshops themselves. And besides outside of a standard project where it would be, timely to hold a workshop on scoping a deliverable, how do you identify when something might require workshopping? Some of the examples that you gave about a workshop are quite granular, and I suppose they've bubbled up as a potential issue. Are there any tactics or tools that you use day to day to realise, this is actually becoming a pain point and we need a workshop on this?
Definitely. I think it comes times where you kind of go, okay, we all just need to kind of get in the room and have a chat about something. I think it would be maybe when there's people might not be talking or communicating with each other that you can see, or it might be when people are having really different ideas about things, and you kind of go, oh, hang on, like this person is not thinking what this person is. So being able to come together in that point. But I also think that, obviously you don't want to, there's a lot of effort and time involved in doing this, right? So you don't just want to do it at the drop of a hat, because people will get but I think when you're kind of going, okay, I really just need to get people in the room and talk it out. I think when you're seeing something that can't be solved by just having maybe a one-on-one chat or in an email or something like that. But I think it's definitely when you're hang on, let's just all come together and group there. So I think perhaps when, there's misalignment, when people aren't really talking with each other, or where it's not really clear on what the next steps are or what needs to be done, I think those are the key kind of points where you would do something like this.
Thank you very much.